My son stood at the head of the table, raising a glass to celebrate my 70th birthday. 60 guests cheered. The champagne was expensive, the seafood was flown in fresh that morning, and every single dollar came from an account I never authorized him to touch. When my wife Ruth squeezed my wrist under the tablecloth and whispered, "We need to leave right now, Jean. They are not here to celebrate you. They are here to bury you," I realized the man I raised had become the man I feared most. But I am getting ahead of myself. Let me take you back to the beginning of that evening, to the moment I walked through those doors and felt the first crack in everything I believed about my family. I truly appreciate you being here with me. Take a moment to comment where you are watching from. It helps me know who this story is reaching. And for clarity, some upcoming details are fictionalized to enhance the story and its impact. Any similarity to real names or settings is purely coincidental, while the lesson remains completely true. My name is Eugene Crawford. Most people call me Gene. For 47 years, I have let the world believe I am just a retired fisherman, with salt ground into the creases of my knuckles. I drive a 12-year-old Ford pickup with a cracked windshield. I wear canvas pants and rubber boots. I live in the same cedar shake cottage on the Beaufort waterfront that I bought in 1988. To my neighbors, I am just old Gene, who fixes crab traps on the weekends. To my son Brandon and his wife Megan, I am a simple-minded old man who got lucky with a small pension and a fisherman's settlement. They have no idea who I really am. They do not know about Crawford Maritime Group. They do not know that 47 vessels hauling cargo along the southeastern seaboard belong to me. They do not know that I own 3 commercial ports, including the one at Port Royal where Brandon works as a mid-level manager. The warehouse he walks through every morning barking orders at men who work twice as hard as he does sits on land with my name etched into the deed. I kept it hidden. Every contract. Every dollar. I buried it beneath holding companies and trusts so thick even the IRS would need a map to find the bottom. My father taught me why when I was 9 years old, sitting on the bow of his fishing boat. He said, "Gene, the biggest fish is the one that stays at the bottom. It is patient. It is quiet. The fish that jumps out of the water showing off its scales, that is the one that gets caught." He was talking about his brother Clarence, who stole my grandfather's entire estate the moment the old man died. Forged signatures. Fake wills. I watched my father rebuild from nothing. I watched betrayal hollow him out like termites in a ship's hull. I swore I would never let money reveal the worst in my family. So I hid it. I stayed at the bottom, but standing in that Charleston waterfront restaurant, surrounded by people I did not recognize, I was beginning to wonder if the darkness had hidden something far worse than greed. "Happy birthday, Dad," Brandon said, coming down the staircase. He was wearing a linen suit that cost more than a month of honest work. His forehead was slick with sweat even though the air conditioning was blowing hard enough to ripple the tablecloths. He was 39 years old. But he looked like a boy who had broken something precious and was trying to blame the dog. Then Megan appeared. My daughter-in-law carries herself like she is doing the world a favor by existing. She walked toward me holding a plastic garment bag at arm's length, like a dead jellyfish. "Gene, you need to change," she said. I looked down at my pressed blue button-down. Ruth had ironed it that morning. "This is a formal event," she continued, pushing the bag into my chest. "We have investors here. People from the yacht club. We cannot have you looking like you just crawled off a shrimp boat." Inside the bag was a Hawaiian shirt. Bright orange with cartoon palm trees. 3 sizes too big. It looked like something a tourist would buy drunk at a gas station in Myrtle Beach. "I am not wearing this, Megan. Please." "Dad," Brandon interjected. His hand landed on my shoulder. It was clammy. "Just for the photos. Do it for me." Ah. I looked at my son. I saw desperation. I saw shame. I saw something darker lurking beneath. So I took the shirt. They made me change in a storage closet. I stood between shelving units, stacked with napkins and hot sauce bottles. pulling on a shirt that hung on me like a sail in dead wind. When I came out, Megan looked me up and down with something closer to a sneer than a nod. "Better," she said. "Now listen. When people ask who you are, tell them you were the family's charter boat captain. Do not talk about the cottage. Do not mention crab traps or engine repairs or anything that sounds like poverty. Just smile. Stay near the kitchen. We will bring you out for the cake, charter boat captain." She wanted me to pretend I was the hired help at my own birthday party. I found Ruth across the room. She was wearing her favorite coral dress, standing near the window overlooking the harbor. She caught my eye. She saw the Hawaiian shirt. She saw my face. Her jaw tightened. Her eyes narrowed. I knew that look. I had seen it before hurricanes. I retreated to the kitchen as instructed. Leaned against the wall. Watched Brandon through the round window and the swinging door. He was drinking too fast. He kept checking his watch. Every time the front door opened, he flinched. Megan was circling the room like a shark, whispering to men in dark suits who were not eating, not drinking, just standing near the exits with their hands folded. My father's voice rose from somewhere deep. "The fish that jumps is the one that gets caught." Something was wrong. The champagne was too expensive. Brandon's sweat was too heavy. Megan's smile was too sharp. This did not feel like a birthday party. It felt like a net closing around me. And the thing about nets is this: by the time you feel the rope, it is already too late to swim. I glanced at the kitchen clock. 7:15. I did not know it yet. But in exactly 45 minutes, my life as I knew it would be over, and the man holding the knife would be wearing my last name. I was still standing in that kitchen, watching my son sweat through his linen suit. When the side door opened and Ruth slipped in, she moved fast, weaving between the catering staff like a woman who had done this before, like a woman navigating a crowded deck in rough seas. Her face was the color of wet ash. Her hands were shaking so hard the car keys rattled between her fingers like loose change in a tin cup. She did not look at me. She grabbed my elbow with a grip that could bend rebar and pulled me toward the back exit. "Ruth, what is going on?" I whispered. "Shut up and walk," she hissed. "Smile at the waiter. Do not look back." We pushed through the back door into the parking lot. The Charleston night was thick and warm, heavy with the smell of pluff mud and salt marsh. The harbor lights shimmered across the water like scattered coins. It should have been beautiful. It felt like a crime scene. Ruth pulled me between two parked cars until we reached my old Ford pickup. It was wedged between a Mercedes and a BMW, looking like a work boot between two glass slippers. She yanked open the passenger door and shoved me inside. She climbed in after me. She locked the doors. The sound of those locks clicking shut was the loudest thing I had ever heard. "Ruth, you are scaring me," I said. "Good," she said. "You should be scared." She took a breath. Then she told me she had gone out to the parking lot 20 minutes earlier to get her headache medication from the glove box of Brandon's car. He had driven us to the restaurant because Megan insisted our truck would embarrass the valet. When Ruth opened the passenger door, she noticed the trunk was not fully latched. It was open just a crack, like someone had closed it in a hurry. Ruth is a woman who notices things. 30 years as a librarian taught her that the smallest details are the ones that tell the biggest stories. She opened the trunk. Inside was a leather messenger bag. It was not zipped. A manila folder was sticking out, its edge bent from being stuffed in carelessly. Ruth pulled it out. "I should not have looked," she said. Her voice broke on the word looked, but I did. And now, I cannot unsee it. She pulled her phone from her purse. Her fingers were trembling so badly, she nearly dropped it twice. She had taken photographs of every page. I took the phone. I squinted at the screen. The first image was a document on legal letterhead. The heading read, "Petition for Emergency Guardianship and Involuntary Commitment. Patient name, Eugene Arthur Crawford. Age 70. Residence, Beaufort, South Carolina. Diagnosis, advanced cognitive decline, with episodes of paranoid delusion and aggressive behavior. The document requested immediate transfer to a secure behavioral health facility. Transport was scheduled for 9 in the evening. Sedation was authorized upon resistance. My hands went cold. The phone felt like it weighed 50 pounds. I swiped to the next image. It was a real estate listing. My house. The Cedar Shake cottage on the Beaufort waterfront. The house where I had raised my son. The house where Ruth and I had slow danced in the kitchen on our 30th anniversary while the radio played Sam Cooke. The listing price was $280,000. Cash only. Quick. Close. It was worth more than double that. But they were not looking for fair value. They were looking for fast money. The seller's agent was listed as Megan Crawford, acting power of attorney. Power of attorney. She had already claimed legal authority over my life, and no judge had signed a single paper. I swiped again. The last photograph was a glossy brochure. Palmetto Grove Senior Living. On the cover was a photograph of a smiling elderly man in a wheelchair being pushed through a garden by a nurse. Below the image, in small print, were the words that made my stomach turn inside out. Secure Memory Care Unit. Specialized facility for patients with advanced dementia and behavioral disorders. 24-hour supervised lockdown. They were going to lock me in a cage. They were going to sell the roof over my head. And they were going to do it tonight. While 60 strangers toasted my health with champagne I never bought, I stared at the screen. The words blurred. Not because my eyes were failing, because the rage was so hot it warped my vision like heat rising off August asphalt. I thought about the last time Brandon had called me crying. It was 11 months ago. He had lost $50,000 on a cryptocurrency platform that turned out to be a pyramid scheme. He was sobbing so hard he could barely speak. Megan had threatened to leave him. The loan sharks were circling. He begged me to bail him out. He swore it was the last time. I drove to Charleston that night with a paper bag full of cash. I handed it to him in the parking lot of a gas station. He hugged me. He smelled like whiskey and desperation. "I will pay you back, Dad," he had said. "I swear on Mama's boat. I am done with that life." He swore on Dorothy May. My father's boat. The last thing my old man ever built. With his own 2 hands before the cancer took him. Brandon swore on her hull like she was just a bargaining chip, like her name meant nothing. I looked at the clock on the dashboard. 7:45. The transport was scheduled for 9. 75 minutes. 75 minutes before men in scrubs would walk through those restaurant doors and drag me out of my own birthday party. I looked at Ruth. She was watching me. Her eyes were wet, but steady. She had already done the math. She had already mapped the escape. That is who Ruth is. She does not panic. She plans. "We need to go, Jean," she said. "Right now. Before they notice. We are gone." I reached for the ignition. My fingers found the key. The old Ford's engine turned over with a groan that sounded like a prayer. Then the restaurant's back door slammed open. Light spilled across the asphalt like a wound. Brandon stood on the threshold, backlit and wild-eyed. His tie was loose. His drink was sloshing over the rim. He looked like a man watching his house burn down. "Dad!" he shouted across the parking lot. His voice cracked. "Where are you going? The surprise is almost here. You cannot leave, Dad. Not now. It is a big one. It is going to change everything." He was right about one thing. Everything was about to change. Just not the way he planned. Brandon crossed that parking lot faster than I had ever seen him move. He was not walking. He was charging, cutting between the parked cars, with the reckless momentum of a man who sees his payday sprinting away from him. He reached my truck before I could get it into reverse and planted himself in front of the driver's side door like a human anchor. His face was red. His breath was coming in short, ragged bursts that fogged the window glass. He slapped both palms flat against the hood. "Dad, stop," he panted. You are confused. You do not know what you are doing. I looked at him through the windshield. The parking lot lights cast an orange glow across his face, turning his features into something hard and unfamiliar. He looked like a man I had never met, a stranger wearing my son's jaw. Move, Brandon, I said. I kept my voice level. I kept my hands steady on the wheel. No. He came around to my window. He pressed his face close to the glass. His eyes were red-rimmed and desperate. You are sick, Dad. You are having an episode. The doctors said this would happen. They said you might try to run. What doctors? I asked. He flinched. It was a small thing, a flicker behind the eyes, but I caught it. He had said too much. He was reading from a script, and he had jumped ahead. Just come inside, he said. His voice shifted. The fake concern drained out, and something colder rushed in to fill the space. Come inside and sit down. Megan has your medicine. You just need to take your medicine and everything will be fine. Medicine. The word hit me like a rotten plank. There was no medicine. I was not sick. I had never been sick. But somewhere in that restaurant, there was a pill or a needle or a powder waiting for me. Something to make me docile. Something to make me compliant. Something to make me sign papers I would never sign with clear eyes. I put the truck in reverse. Brandon grabbed the door handle. He yanked it hard. The truck rocked. You are not going anywhere, old man, he snarled. The mask was gone now. The voice that came out of his mouth was not the voice of my son. It was the voice of a creditor, a collector, a man who had done the math and decided his father was worth more sedated than free. I have worked too hard for this. Do not ruin it. I looked at his hand on the door. I looked at his face. I made a decision that broke something inside me that I do not think will ever heal. I threw the truck into reverse and hit the gas. The tires screamed against the asphalt. Brandon had to let go or get dragged. He stumbled backward. His expensive Italian loafers slipped on the wet pavement, and he went down hard between the Mercedes and the BMW. I heard him hit the ground. I heard him curse. Go, Gene, Ruth shouted. I cranked the wheel. The old Ford swung wide, its headlights sweeping across the restaurant windows. For one frozen second, I saw the party inside. The guests laughing, the champagne flowing, the candles on a birthday cake shaped like a sailboat. My birthday cake. The one I would never cut. I slammed the truck into drive and floored it. We shot out of the parking lot and onto East Bay Street. The tires barked on the cobblestones. I did not look back. I could not afford to. Ruth was gripping the dashboard with both hands. She was crying, but it was a silent kind of crying, the kind that comes from a place so deep the sound cannot climb out. I reached over and took her hand. It was cold. We merged onto the interstate heading south toward Beaufort. The city lights of Charleston bled across the rearview mirror like a wound that would not close. I drove 10 miles before my hands stopped shaking. I drove 20 miles before my heart found a rhythm that did not feel like a fist pounding on a locked door. The highway was dark. The marshes stretched out on either side of us, vast and black, smelling of salt and decay. Spanish moss hung from the live oaks like funeral shrouds. It was beautiful country. It had never looked so threatening. My phone buzzed in the cup holder. Then again. I glanced down. Brandon. 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 The screen lit up the cab every few seconds like a strobe light. I read the previews. Dad, you are having an episode. Come back. Dad. You forgot your medication. We are worried. Dad. We just want to help you. Please come home. Gaslighting. He was trying to rewrite the parking lot. He was trying to erase his own snarl, his own grip on the door, his own words. You are not going anywhere, old man. He was replacing them with concern and kindness, building a paper trail of text messages that would look compassionate to a judge. I thought about my boy. Not the man in the parking lot. The boy. I thought about Brandon at 7 years old, standing on the bow of Dorothy May, holding a fishing rod for the first time. The rod was bigger than he was. He could barely keep the tip up, but he was grinning so wide the sun bounced off his teeth. I had stood behind him, my hands over his hands, teaching him to feel the tug, teaching him patience, teaching him to read the water. When the line goes tight, do not yank, I had told him. Let the fish run. Let it tire itself out. Then bring it in slow. Respect the catch, son. Everything worth having takes time. He had caught a spot tail bass that afternoon. 3 pounds. He held it up with both hands and screamed with joy. I took a photograph. It sat on my nightstand for 20 years. I do not know where it is now. Megan probably threw it away. That boy was gone. He did not die all at once. He died in pieces. One bad bet at a time. One lie at a time. One swipe of a stolen credit card at a time. The man in the parking lot was just the husk, a hollowed-out shell wearing my son's face. Ruth's phone buzzed. A voicemail. She put it on speaker. Megan's voice filled the cab. It started sweet, dripping honey and concern. Mom, we are so worried about Gene. He seemed very confused tonight. Very agitated. We just want him to be safe. Then the honey curdled. We have already called the police, Mom. We told them he is driving erratically. We told them he might be armed. You know how the police are with older men who seem confused, especially men who look like Gene. We do not want an accident. We do not want anyone to get hurt. Just bring him back. Or pull over somewhere safe and let them come to you. The cab went silent. The only sound was the engine and the tires on wet asphalt and my own blood roaring through my skull. She had done it. She had weaponized the one thing every black man in the South carries in his chest like a second heartbeat. The fear. The history. The knowledge that a traffic stop can become a funeral in the time it takes to reach for a wallet. Megan knew exactly what she was doing. She was not just trying to commit me. She was willing to let me get killed to secure her payday. I gripped the wheel. I stared at the dark road ahead. Somewhere behind us, sirens were probably already spinning to life. Gene, Ruth whispered. Her voice was barely a thread. What do we do? I did not answer right away. I listened to the engine. I listened to the rain beginning to tap against the roof. I listened to the highway humming beneath us like the deck of a ship cutting through black water. We keep driving, I said. And we stop trusting anyone who shares our last name. The gas gauge was kissing empty. The orange warning light had been pulsing for 15 miles. I pulled off the highway at a Shell station, somewhere between Walterboro and Beaufort. The neon sign buzzed and flickered in the rain, casting a sick yellow glow across the wet pavement. Stay here, I told Ruth. I will fill up and grab some water. I stepped out into the warm rain. I slid my debit card into the pump. It was the card from the local credit union, the one I used for groceries and bait. It had about $5,000 in it. My rainy day fund. Money I had actually earned turning wrenches on boat engines. The screen blinked. Please wait. The hourglass spun. Transaction declined. Do not honor. I frowned. Pulled the card out. Wiped it. Slid it back in. Transaction declined. Do not honor. See cashier. I walked inside. The store smelled like burnt coffee and pine cleaner. A kid behind the counter was scrolling through his phone. Pump 3 is not taking my card, I said. He sighed. Took the card. Swiped it on his terminal. Frowned. Says do not honor. Means it is flagged. Lost or stolen, maybe. He looked at the Hawaiian shirt, the wet boots. You got cash, old-timer? $35. Not enough to fill the tank and get us through the night. I stepped away and dialed the number on the back of the card. An automated voice asked for my card number. I punched it in. The card you entered has been reported lost or stolen. To speak with a representative, press 0. I pressed 0 so hard I thought the screen would crack. A woman answered. Polished and distant. Security department. How may I assist you? This is Eugene Crawford. My card was just declined. I need to know why. Keys clicked. I see a note on your file. This card was reported lost 2 hours ago by your authorized power of attorney holder. The words landed like a wave breaking over the bow. My what? Your power of attorney. A Mr. Brandon Crawford. He flagged the account and placed a freeze on all associated assets due to the account holder's medical incapacity. Medical incapacity. 2 hours ago. Before the party started. Before the first champagne cork popped. He had buried me on paper while I was still breathing. Unlock it, I said. I am Eugene Crawford. I am right here. I am not incapacitated. Sir, once the flag is in the system, we need the guardian to lift it. Or you can visit a branch with legal documentation proving your competency. She paused. If you are experiencing a medical emergency, I would recommend calling 911. She thought I was crazy. I could hear it in her tone. She was speaking to me the way people speak to children. Slow, simple, patient, in the worst possible way. I hung up. I stood in the fluorescent glare of that gas station wearing a ridiculous Hawaiian shirt, holding a useless piece of plastic. And I understood something with perfect clarity. My son had not just betrayed me, he had erased me. With a phone call, he had turned me from a man into a patient, from a father into a file number, from a citizen into a ward of the state. I walked back to the truck. Ruth looked at me. She did not ask. She knew. They locked it, she whispered. They locked everything. I said. Brandon called the bank before the party, Ruth. Before we walked through the door. The whole birthday was a holding pen. They were keeping us in one place until the van arrived. Ruth closed her eyes. A tear tracked down her cheek. I looked at the phone in my hand. The iPhone. Brandon had given it to me last Christmas. Wrapped it in a red bow. Grinned like a child. So we can stay connected, Dad. So I can always find you. So he could always find me. I turned it over. I thought about the GPS chip inside. The little blue dot on a screen somewhere labeled Dad, leading them straight to this gas station on this empty highway. Megan had called the police, told them I was armed, told them I was confused. Every second this phone stayed on. It was painting a target on my back. I opened the door, stepped into the rain, looked at the phone one last time. It glowed in my palm, like a lantern in a dark sea. A gift, he had called it. A leash is what it was. I raised my arm and threw it against the pavement as hard as I could. It exploded. Glass shards scattered across the wet asphalt like shrapnel. The screen went black. I brought my boot down on it and ground my heel into the pieces until there was nothing left but dust and fragments. I stood there breathing hard. Rain running down my face. The parking lot was empty. The neon sign buzzed its yellow song. Somewhere on the highway, a truck horn blared in the distance. I got back in the cab. Soaked. Shivering. But the shaking had stopped. The fear had burned away. Consumed by something hotter. Ruth was staring at me. Her eyes were wide, but she was not afraid. She was lit up from inside. The way a lighthouse looks. When the storm hits and the keeper throws the switch. They want a confused old man, I said. My voice was low and steady, as a tide pulling out. They want a victim. They want a name on a dotted line. But they forgot something, Ruth. I turned the key. The engine caught. That beautiful, ugly diesel growl that sounded like a promise. I am not a retired fisherman. I am the man who built a fleet from a single boat with a hole in the hull. And I am done hiding at the bottom. I put the truck in gear and pulled out of that station, leaving the shattered phone on the wet pavement like a broken anchor cut loose from a ship that was finally ready to sail. We needed shelter. We needed a place they could not trace. Could not track, could not touch. And I knew exactly one door in the world that would open for us at this hour, without asking a single question. The road to Opal Jenkins's house was a dirt lane lined with palmetto trees and oyster shell. It wound through the marsh like a secret, narrowing with every turn, until the headlights caught a small clapboard cottage with a tin roof and a porch light that had been burning since 1972. I know because Opal told me once that she turned it on the night her husband left for Vietnam and never turned it off. He came home in a box. The light stayed on. I pulled the truck under the live oak in her side yard and killed the engine. It was just past 10. The marsh was alive, with the sound of frogs and insects, a chorus so loud it hummed in your chest. Ruth looked at me. She will ask questions. No, I said. She will not. I was right. Opal Jenkins opened her screen door before I even knocked. She was 78 years old, small as a sparrow, with silver hair pinned back, and reading glasses hanging from a chain around her neck. She was wearing a housecoat and slippers. She looked at me. She looked at the Hawaiian shirt. She looked at Ruth standing behind me with mascara tracks on her cheeks and a purse clutched to her chest like a life raft. Opal did not ask what happened. She did not ask why we were there at 10 on a weeknight. She did not ask about the shirt, or the tears, or the fear. She pushed the screen door open and said 5 words. Sit down. I will heat the gumbo. That is the kind of woman Opal Jenkins is. She has lived next to us for 31 years. She does not know I own a maritime empire. She does not know about the ports, or the ships, or the money. She knows that I fixed her porch railing when it came loose in a storm. She knows that Ruth brings her tomatoes from the garden every August. She knows that we are her neighbors, and that neighbors do not need explanations. They need gumbo. Her kitchen was small and warm. It smelled like okra and bay leaf, and something deeper, something that had been simmering on that stove for decades. The wallpaper was peeling near the ceiling. The linoleum was cracked in the corners. A porcelain rooster sat on the windowsill next to a photograph of her husband in his army uniform. Young and proud, and already dead without knowing it. Opal set 2 bowls on the table. She ladled the gumbo in with a wooden spoon that was worn smooth from years of stirring. She put a plate of cornbread between us and a jar of sweet tea that was so cold it wept condensation onto the table. She did not sit with us. She just patted Ruth on the shoulder and shuffled back to her bedroom. Wake me if you need anything, she said from the doorway. The couch pulls out. Sheets are in the hall closet. The door closed. We were alone. I looked at the bowl in front of me. The gumbo was thick and dark, studded with shrimp and andouille, and the holy trinity of onion, celery, and bell pepper. It was the kind of food that heals things that medicine cannot reach. I picked up the spoon. I took a bite. The warmth spread through my chest, like a hand pressing against a wound. And then something broke inside me. I am a man who could buy every house on this street with a single wire transfer. I have accounts with balances that look like coordinates on a nautical chart. I own cargo vessels that cross the Atlantic. I sit at the top of a corporation that employs 400 people. But that night, sitting in Opal Jenkins's kitchen wearing a damp Hawaiian shirt with $35 in my pocket and a debit card that was nothing more than a plastic rectangle, I was a beggar. I was eating charity soup in a borrowed kitchen while the woman who served it lived on a social security check that barely covered her electricity. The tears came before I could stop them. They fell into the gumbo. I did not wipe them. I just let them fall. Ruth reached across the table and took my hand. Her fingers were cold, but her grip was iron. "This is temporary, Jean," she said. "I know," I whispered. "But it should not be happening at all." We sat in silence for a long time. The clock on the wall ticked. The frogs sang outside. The house creaked the way old houses do, settling into its bones for the night. I thought about my mother, Dorothy May Crawford, a woman who never trusted banks. She kept her money in a tin box, hidden beneath a loose board in the kitchen floor. She said banks were just buildings full of strangers who could say no whenever they pleased. I used to think she was being paranoid. Sitting in Opal's kitchen with a frozen account and a destroyed phone, I understood her completely. Mama was right. She was always right. Ruth broke the silence. Her voice was low and precise. Jean, we cannot stay here. They will search the neighborhood by morning. They know our routines. They know our friends. I know. We need to get to the house before they change every lock. And we need what is underneath the dock. I looked at her. She held my gaze. Her eyes were dry now, sharp as compass needles. She was talking about the box. The waterproof steel box I had bolted to the concrete piling beneath our dock 12 years ago. The one I checked every 6 months to make sure the seal was tight and the contents were dry. The one that held the original incorporation documents for Crawford Maritime Group. The stock certificates. The deeds to 3 ports. And $60,000 in cash, sealed in vacuum bags. Brandon did not know about the box. Megan did not know about the box. Nobody knew about the box except me, Ruth, and a lawyer named Teddy Banks, who I trusted with my life because he had saved it twice in the Mekong Delta. We go at 4 in the morning, I said. Before the sun. Before the neighbors wake. We get in, we get the box, and we get out. Ruth nodded. She squeezed my hand once. Then she stood, cleared the bowls, and washed them in the sink. She dried them and put them back exactly where Opal kept them. She did not leave a trace. Ruth has always been careful that way. She moves through the world like a woman who understands that kindness means leaving things better than you found them. I lay down on the pull-out couch. The springs groaned. The cushions smelled like lavender and dust. I stared at the ceiling and listened to the marsh breathing outside. Somewhere out there, my son was probably sitting in a police station filing a missing person report on a man who was not missing, just awake for the first time in 40 years. I closed my eyes. I needed 4 hours of sleep. In 4 hours, the tide would be low enough to reach the box. In 4 hours, I would have the ammunition I needed to fight back. But tonight, in this borrowed kitchen, with gumbo in my belly and a stranger's kindness wrapped around me like a blanket, I let myself grieve. Not for the money, not for the house, for the boy who used to hold a fishing rod with both hands and grin so wide the sun bounced off his teeth. That boy was worth more than $80 million. And he was gone. We left Opal's house at 3:45. The marsh was still dark, but the sky had begun to soften along the eastern edge, a thin gray line separating the water from the heavens. Ruth drove. I sat in the passenger seat with my hands on my knees, watching the familiar roads unspool before us like a story I had memorized, but could no longer trust. We reached our driveway at 4:12. The salt air hit me through the open window like a slap from someone I used to love. Everything looked the same. The cedar shake walls. The tin roof. The porch where I had sat 10,000 mornings drinking coffee and watching the pelicans dive. But something was wrong. Something I felt before I saw. There was a sign on the lawn. A metal stake driven into the dirt between my hydrangeas. For sale. Cash only. Immediate possession. The words were printed in bold red letters on a white background. It looked like a wound. It looked like a headstone. I stared at it. That sign was not selling property. It was selling my extinction. It was telling the world that Eugene Crawford was finished. That his life was being liquidated. That everything he had built was available for the price of a quick signature. I wanted to rip it out of the ground and throw it into the marsh. But I was not a homeowner tonight. I was a ghost returning to haunt his own house. Ghosts do not make noise. We crept to the front door. I reached for my keys out of habit, but I already knew. Brandon had changed the locks. The key slid in halfway and stopped. My own key. The key to the house I had bought with cash 37 years ago. Useless metal. We went around to the basement window. It was small, barely wide enough for a man my size. I used my pocket knife to pry the latch. I froze. Waited. No lights. No movement. Just the house settling and the marsh breathing. I slid through feet first and landed on the concrete floor of the utility room. The air was stale. It smelled of mildew and salt and something else. Neglect. The house already smelled abandoned, like the soul had been sucked out through the walls. I helped Ruth through. We stood in the darkness of our own basement, listening. Above us, the floorboards creaked. The house groaned. It sounded like footsteps. For one terrible second I thought they were here, waiting with police, with orderlies, with needles. But it was just the wood, expanding in the humidity. The house was talking to us. It missed us. We did not go upstairs. We did not need anything from the rooms above. Everything that mattered was outside. We slipped through the basement door that opened onto the backyard. The lawn was wet with dew. The marsh stretched out beyond the property line, vast and silver in the pre-dawn light. I could smell the pluff mud and the oyster beds and the salt that had been soaking into my bones for half a century. I walked toward the dock. My dock. The dock I had rebuilt twice with my own hands. Once after Hurricane Hugo, and once after Matthew. 40 feet of weathered pine stretching out over the tidal creek. I stopped at the edge. The slip was empty. The space where Dorothy May had rested for 30 years was nothing but black water and a frayed rope hanging from the piling like a severed artery. The tide was low, just as I had planned, and the mud beneath the slip glistened dark and wet in the fading moonlight. But the boat was gone. The cradle was gone. The canvas cover I had stitched by hand was gone. I stood there and felt something crack open inside my chest that was deeper than rage, deeper than grief. It was the sound a man makes when the last thread connecting him to his father snaps. My father built that boat. He started it in 1969 in a shed behind our house on Ladies Island. He worked on it every evening after pulling nets all day. I would sit on an overturned bucket and watch him bend the planks with steam, shaping the hull with a patience that bordered on prayer. It took him 3 years. When it was finished, my mother walked down to the water and pressed her palm against the bow. She whispered the name. Dorothy May. Her own name. She said a boat should carry the name of someone who would always bring it home. My father fished from that boat for 22 years. When the cancer took him in 1994, I inherited her. I maintained her the way he taught me, sanding the hull every spring, caulking the seams, replacing the rigging when the salt ate through. She was not a boat. She was a conversation with a dead man. She was the last place on earth where I could still hear my father's voice. And Brandon sold her. He sold Dorothy May to pay for digital coins that evaporated like sea spray in a headwind. He sold my father's hands. He sold my mother's name. He sold 30 years of Sundays. I stood at the edge of that empty slip, and I whispered into the dark water, I will get you back. Every plank. Every nail. Ruth touched my shoulder. She did not speak. She knew that some pain is too large for words. She just stood beside me and let the silence do its work. I wiped my face. I took a breath. I dropped to my knees at the edge of the dock and lowered myself over the side. The water was chest deep and cold. The mud sucked at my boots. The barnacles on the pilings scraped my forearms as I waded beneath the dock into the darkness. I reached the third piling from the shore. I ran my hands along the concrete until my fingers found the steel bracket. The box was still there, bolted to the piling 2 feet below the waterline, sealed in marine-grade epoxy, invisible to anyone who did not know exactly where to look. I unclipped the bracket. I pulled the box free. It was heavy. 40 pounds of fireproof, waterproof steel. I held it against my chest and waded back to the dock. Ruth helped me climb up. I set the box on the pine planks. Seawater dripped from its edges. I wiped the salt crust off the combination lock and dialed. Left. Right. Left. It clicked open. Inside sat the truth. Not cash. Cash is for amateurs. Cash gets spent on boats that people do not deserve. Inside were the original incorporation documents for Crawford Maritime Group. Inside were the stock certificates representing 51% of voting shares. Inside were the deeds to 3 commercial ports along the southeastern seaboard, including Port Royal. And beneath all of that, sealed in vacuum bags, $60,000 in $100 bills. I looked at Ruth. She was standing over me, her coral dress stained with salt water, her hair wild in the pre-dawn wind. She looked like a warrior queen surveying the armory before battle. "We have the ammunition," I said. She nodded. Her jaw was set. Her eyes burned. "Make the call, Jean," she said. "No," I said. "Not a call. Calls can be traced. Calls can be intercepted." I looked toward the house, toward the hallway closet, where I had hidden something, behind a false wall, 3 years ago. "We need the shortwave radio." The hallway closet smelled like mothballs and old cedar. I pushed past 3 winter coats that had not been worn in a decade, 2 cardboard boxes filled with Christmas ornaments, and a pair of rubber boots cracked at the soles. My fingers found the seam in the back panel. I pressed the left corner, then the right, and the false wall popped open with a soft click. Behind it sat the Yaesu transceiver, 15 pounds of cold metal and analog circuitry wrapped in a wool blanket I had placed there 6 years earlier. Ruth stood behind me, holding the steel box against her chest like a newborn. She did not ask what I was doing. She already knew. I carried the radio to the kitchen table and set it down next to the box of documents. The antenna wire was coiled in a plastic bag, sealed with electrical tape. I unwound it carefully, ran the wire through the kitchen window, and clipped it to the gutter outside. Ruth plugged the power Megan into the wall outlet near the refrigerator. The dial glowed amber. I turned the frequency dial to 147.3 megahertz. That was the number Teddy Banks and I had agreed upon in 1998, the year we lost a cargo ship off Cape Fear and spent 3 nights coordinating the salvage operation by radio because the satellite phones were dead. I pressed the transmit button and sent 3 short pulses, 3 long, 3 short, SOS. Then I added our personal call sign, Delta Foxtrot Charlie, and waited. The kitchen clock read 4:37 in the morning. Ruth sat across from me, her coral dress still damp from the dock water, her hands folded on the table. She did not speak. The static crackled and popped. I counted 60 seconds. Then 120. At 180 seconds, the speaker barked to life. "Delta Foxtrot Charlie. This is Tango Bravo. I read you. What is your situation?" Teddy Banks, 63 years old. Former Navy intelligence officer turned forensic accountant. The man had a memory like a steel vault and a voice like gravel poured into a tin bucket. I had trusted him with my empire for 22 years, and he had never once failed me. I pressed the transmit button and spoke slowly. "Teddy, my son tried to have me committed tonight. They filed emergency guardianship papers. They froze my bank accounts. They sold my house listing to a cash buyer. My phone is destroyed. My boat is gone. Ruth and I are at the Beaufort property. I have the box." Silence. Then Teddy's voice came back, lower and harder than before. "How long ago did they freeze the accounts?" 2 hours before the party started, I said. Brandon used a power of attorney document. The bank told me he cited medical incapacity. Teddy cursed quietly. "That means Megan drafted the paperwork. She is the only one with the legal training to pull that off. She lost her license," I said. "Ruth found out 3 months ago." Teddy paused for 5 full seconds. Then he said, "Jean, if she is disbarred and she filed those documents, every single paper they submitted is void. Everyone. The guardianship petition, the power of attorney, the bank freeze authorization, all of it. Do you understand what that means?" I understood. It meant they had built their entire trap on a foundation of sand, and they did not know the tide was coming in. Ruth and I left the house through the basement window at 5:15 in the morning. We drove north toward Charleston, stopping once at a roadside shop where I purchased a navy blue linen suit and Ruth selected a cream blouse and dark slacks. We arrived at Teddy's waterfront office at 11:45. He was waiting at the door with 2 cups of black coffee and a manila folder 4 inches thick. He led us to the conference room on the 2nd floor overlooking the harbor. He opened the folder and laid the pages across the table like a surgeon displaying instruments before an operation. The forensic audit had taken him 6 hours to compile, pulling records from port authorities, bank statements, cryptocurrency exchanges, and state bar databases. Brandon Crawford. $150,000 in cargo revenue diverted from Port Royal Terminal over 18 months. $200,000 lost in a cryptocurrency pyramid scheme called NovaCoin that collapsed in March. $80,000 in gambling debts owed to 3 separate offshore sportsbooks. Total exposure, approximately $430,000. Megan Crawford. $90,000 in personal credit card debt across 11 accounts. South Carolina State Bar license revoked 14 months ago for falsifying real estate closing documents on 2 residential transactions. Currently practicing without a license, which constituted a 3rd-degree felony. I stared at the numbers. My son had stolen from the company I built with my bare hands, lost a fortune chasing digital ghosts, and gambled away what was left. His wife had forged legal documents while pretending to hold a license the state had already taken from her. Together they owed nearly $500,000. And their solution was to lock me in a memory care facility and sell everything I owned. Teddy leaned back in his chair and crossed his arms. "Here is what I recommend," he said. "We let them walk into that courtroom with every fraudulent document Megan prepared. We let them present their case. We let the judge read the petition. And then we open this folder." I shook my head slowly. "That is not enough," I said. "I want them to believe they have already won. I want them to see the finish line. I want them to taste it. And then I want to pull it away." Teddy smiled for the first time that morning. "You want the Midway strategy," he said. I nodded. At the Battle of Midway, the American fleet let the Japanese carriers launch their planes, waited until the decks were loaded with fuel and ammunition, and then struck from above. Total devastation delivered at the moment of maximum vulnerability. "I will appear confused," I said. "I will stumble over my words. I will forget names. I will look like a man who cannot remember where he parked his truck. And when they finish their performance, when the judge reaches for his pen, you will walk through that door and set the world on fire." Teddy extended his hand across the table. I shook it. His grip was iron. Ruth touched my shoulder and whispered, "You are not the fish, Jean. You are the net." I looked out the window at the harbor below. Somewhere out there, my boat was drifting in someone else's hands. But boats can be found. Boats can be brought home. The trap was set, and I was ready to swim straight into their net, because the fisherman who knows the net is the one who cuts through it. And I had the sharpest knife they had ever seen. 3 days passed. I spent them inside Teddy's office, sleeping on a leather couch that smelled like cigars and old case files. Ruth slept in the guest room down the hall. We ate takeout from a soul food restaurant on King Street. Containers of fried catfish and collard greens stacked on the conference table next to the forensic audit folder. Teddy made phone calls. I stared at the harbor through the window and waited for the net to tighten. On the morning of the 4th day, Teddy set his coffee down and said, "They filed a missing person report. Charleston County Sheriff. Brandon told them you wandered away from your birthday party in a state of confusion and that you may be a danger to yourself." He provided a statement from Megan claiming she witnessed signs of advanced dementia over the past 6 months. He gave them a photograph of you in that Hawaiian shirt. I closed my eyes. My own son had reported me missing like a stray dog. He had taken the humiliation from that restaurant and turned it into a weapon. The old man in the ridiculous shirt, confused and wandering. That was the story they wanted the world to believe. Teddy continued. The sheriff's office issued a silver alert yesterday evening. Your name and photograph are in the state database. Every patrol car in the Low Country is looking for you. If they find you here, they will take you into custody and deliver you directly to Brandon as your emergency guardian. The paperwork Megan filed is fraudulent, but it is still active in the system. We have not challenged it yet. Ruth walked in from the hallway. She had heard everything. Her face was calm, but her hands were shaking. She looked at me and said, "Jean, if they pick you up on the road, it is over. They win." I stood up from the couch. "No," I said. "If they pick me up on the road, they think they win. There is a difference." Teddy raised an eyebrow. "What are you thinking?" "I am thinking that a fish who swims into the net on purpose is not caught. He is choosing his battlefield. I want to be found. I want them to take me. I want Brandon to believe that everything is going according to his plan." Ruth grabbed my arm. "Jean, that is insane. They will drug you. They will lock you in that facility. You saw the brochure. 24-hour lockdown. No phone. No visitors without guardian approval. You will disappear." I put my hand over hers. "I will not disappear," I said. "I will be exactly where they want me. And that is exactly where I need to be. Because when the court date arrives, I need to look like a man who has been broken. I need the judge to see a victim. I need Brandon and Megan to feel safe enough to present every fraudulent document they have without hesitation. If I am hiding in a lawyer's office looking healthy and sharp, they will suspect something. They will hold back. They will send only half the evidence. But if I am sitting in a locked room in Palmetto Grove wearing a hospital gown, they will believe they have already won. And they will put everything on the table." Teddy leaned forward. He studied my face for a long time. Then he said, "You want to be the bait." "I want to be the bait," I confirmed. He opened a desk drawer and pulled out a single sheet of paper. He slid it across the table. "This is a protected legal instruction," he said. "It is called a Jonah filing. I name you as my client, under duress. It means that no matter what documents Brandon and Megan present, no matter what facility they place you in, I retain legal standing to appear in court on your behalf without their knowledge or consent. They cannot block me. They cannot deny my access. The moment the judge opens the hearing, I walk through the door, and they cannot stop me." I read the document twice. It was 3 paragraphs long and written in language so dense it felt like reading a foreign alphabet. But the meaning was clear. This paper was my lifeline. As long as it existed, Teddy could reach me anywhere, in any facility, behind any locked door. I signed it. The pen felt heavier than it should have. Ruth signed as witness. A single tear fell onto the page next to her signature. She wiped it with her thumb, but the ink had already smeared. She looked at me and said, "If they hurt you in there, I will burn that place to the ground myself." I kissed her forehead. She smelled like lavender and salt water, and 47 years of a life I would fight to keep. That afternoon I drove alone. Teddy and Ruth stayed behind. The plan required me to be found without them, a confused old man, in a diesel truck on a back road. I took Route 17 south toward Beaufort, driving 10 miles below the speed limit with the windows down. The Hawaiian shirt was folded on the passenger seat. I put it back on. It was part of the costume now. At 4:22 in the afternoon, a Beaufort County Sheriff cruiser pulled behind me with its lights flashing. I slowed the truck and pulled onto the gravel shoulder. My heart hammered against my ribs like a fist on a locked door. The officer approached my window. He was young, maybe 28, with a crew cut and a careful expression. "Sir, are you Eugene Crawford?" I looked at him and let my eyes go soft. I let my mouth hang open just slightly. I tilted my head, as if the question confused me. "I think so," I said. "I am not sure. I was trying to find my boat." "Do you know where they put my boat?" The officer spoke into his radio. "I have the silver alert subject, Route 17, mile marker, 41. He is conscious and responsive, but appears disoriented. Requesting medical transport, I sat in the truck and waited. The sun was dropping behind the pine trees. Somewhere in Charleston, Teddy Banks was placing the Jonah, filing into a fireproof safe. Somewhere in a house I used to own, Brandon was probably celebrating, believing his lost father had been recovered, like misplaced cargo. The ambulance arrived 14 minutes later. 2 paramedics guided me onto a stretcher. I did not resist. I let my body go limp, let my head roll to the side, let my eyes drift. One paramedic shined a light into my pupils. The other strapped my wrists with soft restraints. As they loaded me into the ambulance, I whispered a single word so quietly that no one heard it. Midway, the ambulance delivered me to Palmetto Grove Senior Living at 6 minutes past 5 in the evening. The building sat at the end of a gravel road lined with live oaks, draped in Spanish moss. The kind of place that looked peaceful from the outside and felt like a coffin from the inside. The sign at the entrance read, "Compassionate care for every stage of life" in gold letters on a green background. I counted the security cameras as they wheeled me through the front doors. 4 in the lobby, 2 in the hallway, 1 above the nurse's station. 7 eyes watching a man who was pretending to be blind. A nurse named Dolores checked me in. She was a heavy woman with kind eyes and a lanyard that held 9 keys. She read the intake form aloud, while I sat in a wheelchair I did not need. Eugene Arthur Crawford, age 70. Admitted under emergency guardianship order filed by Brandon Michael Crawford. Diagnosis: early onset vascular dementia with episodes of confusion and wandering. Authorized medications include lorazepam as needed for agitation. No visitors without written guardian approval. Lorazepam. They had authorized sedation before I even arrived. I kept my face slack and my hands folded in my lap. Dolores wheeled me to a room at the end of the second-floor hallway. The room had a single bed with metal rails, a window that opened only 4 inches, a plastic chair, and a television mounted to the wall that played a nature documentary on repeat. The door locked from the outside. I spent 2 nights in that room. They brought meals on plastic trays, scrambled eggs in the morning, a turkey sandwich at noon, meatloaf at 6. The food was warm but tasteless, cooked for people who had forgotten what flavor meant. I ate every bite because I needed my strength. The nurses checked on me every 3 hours. I answered their questions slowly, deliberately mixing up dates and names the way the intake form said I would. When they asked me what year it was, I said 1987. When they asked me the president, I said I could not remember. When they asked me if I knew where I was, I looked at the window and said, "Is this the boat?" On the second night, the door opened at 11:45. It was not a nurse. It was Brandon. He stood in the doorway wearing a polo shirt and khaki pants, the uniform of a man who believed he had won. His eyes were red. He smelled like bourbon. He pulled the plastic chair to the side of my bed and sat down heavily. He did not speak for almost a full minute. Then he leaned forward and put his hand on my arm. "Dad," he said, "I know you are angry. I know this looks bad. But this is for your own good. You were wandering. You were confused. Megan and we just want to make sure you are safe. The doctors here are going to take care of you. And when you get better, we will bring you home." I looked at his hand on my arm. The same hand that had signed the power of attorney. The same hand that had frozen my bank account. The same hand that had sold my boat. I wanted to grab his wrist and tell him that I knew everything. That I had read every document. That Teddy Banks had already compiled enough evidence to put him and his wife in prison for a decade. But I did not. I let my lip tremble. I let my eyes water. I said, "Brandon, where is your mother? I want to see your mother." He pulled his hand back. "Mom is fine," he said. "She is at home. She will visit when the doctors say it is okay." He stood up, adjusted his polo shirt, and walked to the door. He paused with his hand on the frame. "Happy birthday, Dad," he said. Then the lock clicked behind him. On the third morning, they moved me. A male, orderly named Vincent, told me I was being transferred to a private residence for continued care under family supervision. He helped me into a van with tinted windows. We drove for 40 minutes. When the van doors opened, I was looking at my own house in Beaufort. The for sale sign was gone. The locks had been changed again, and the front porch, where I had sat with Ruth for 47 years watching the tide roll in, now had a steel security gate bolted across it. They took me inside and up the stairs to the attic. The attic had been converted into a bedroom. A mattress on the floor. A portable toilet in the corner. A padlock on the outside of the door. The single window faced the water, and through the glass I could see the empty dock where Dorothy May used to rest. The rope still hung from the piling like a noose waiting for a neck. Vincent set a paper bag on the mattress. Inside were 2 bottles of water, a package of crackers, and a prepaid cellular phone with a note taped to it. The note was in Megan's handwriting. It read, "This phone calls one number. Ours. Do not try anything else. The network is restricted. Be good. And this will be over soon." I sat on the mattress and looked through the window. The harbor stretched out before me, gray and wide under a morning sky, heavy with clouds. Shrimp boats moved in the distance. Pelicans dove for fish near the marsh grass. The world continued as if nothing had happened, as if an old man had not been locked in his own attic by his own blood. I picked up the phone and turned it over in my hands. Megan had been clever. A restricted network meant no outgoing calls except to their number. No internet. No messages. She had built a digital cage to match the physical one. But Megan did not know about the window. She did not know that from this attic, on a clear day, I could see the roof of the marine supply store on Bay Street, where Captain Leon Marsh kept a shortwave antenna on a 30-foot mast. And she did not know that 3 nights from now, when the court hearing was scheduled, Ruth and Teddy would be sitting in that store with a folder 4 inches thick, waiting for a signal I had not yet sent. I pressed my palm against the glass. The water below was dark and patient. Like me, on the second day in the attic, the door opened at 9 in the morning, and Megan walked in carrying a tripod and a ring light. She wore a white blouse and gold earrings, her hair pulled back in a tight bun that made her face look sharper than it already was. She set the tripod near the window where the morning light was strongest and mounted her phone on top of it. She adjusted the ring light until the glow hit my face directly. Then she smiled at me the way a person smiles at a dog they are about to put down. "Good morning, Papa Jean," she said. "We are going to make a little video today. Just a quick one. Our followers have been asking about you, and I want them to see how well we are taking care of you." I did not know Megan had followers. I did not know she made videos. But as she tapped the screen and the red recording light blinked on, I realized this was not a family update. This was a performance. She was building a public record of my decline, a digital museum of my supposed dementia, designed to support the guardianship claim in court. She turned the camera toward me and began narrating in a voice so sweet it could rot teeth. "Here he is, everyone. My father-in-law, Gene Crawford. 70 years young. As you can see, he is comfortable and safe. We converted the upstairs into a private suite for him. He has everything he needs. Water, snacks, a view of the harbor he loves so much." She paused and tilted her head. "Some days are better than others, right, Papa Jean?" I sat on the mattress and stared at the floor. I let my shoulders slump. I let my jaw hang loose. The costume was becoming easier to wear. Megan walked through the attic, narrating every detail. She pointed at the portable toilet and called it a private bathroom. She pointed at the paper bag of crackers and called it his favorite snacks. She pointed at the padlock on the outside of the door and did not mention it at all. The camera never showed the lock. The camera never showed the steel gate on the front porch. The camera only showed what Megan wanted the world to see. Then she did something that nearly broke my disguise. She walked to the corner of the attic, where I had stored a wooden chest for 30 years. Inside that chest were my father's nautical charts, hand-drawn maps of every fishing route along the Carolina coast, from Georgetown to Savannah. My father had spent 40 years creating those maps, marking the depth of every channel, the location of every sandbar, the timing of every tidal shift. They were irreplaceable. They were the only inheritance he left me that could not be measured in dollars. Megan opened the chest and pulled out a stack of the charts. She held them up to the camera and laughed. "Look at these old things," she said. "He used to sit downstairs and stare at them for hours. The doctors say fixation on old objects is a classic sign of cognitive decline." She dropped them onto the floor carelessly, and one of the pages tore at the corner. My father's handwriting, faded blue ink on yellowed paper, ripped like it meant nothing. I bit the inside of my cheek until I tasted copper. My hands trembled, not from weakness, from the effort of keeping them still. But Megan was not finished. She gathered the charts into a pile, carried them downstairs, and returned 12 minutes later, smelling like smoke. She looked at the camera and said, "We cleared out some of the clutter today. The therapist says a clean environment helps with confusion." Then she winked. She had burned them. 40 years of my father's work. Every line he drew by hand under a kerosene lamp on the deck of Dorothy May. Every route he memorized and recorded so that his son and his son's sons would never be lost on the water. She had turned them into ash and called it therapy. The camera was still recording. The red light blinked like a heartbeat. Megan asked me to wave. I raised my hand slowly and let it fall. She asked me to say hello to her followers. I opened my mouth and said, "Where is my boat?" She laughed and said, "See? He asks about that boat every single day." Classic repetitive behavior. "We love you, Papa Jean." She turned off the camera, collapsed the tripod, and tucked the ring light under her arm. She looked at me with an expression that contained no guilt, no shame, and no recognition that she had just destroyed something sacred. Then she said, "The hearing is in 3 days, Papa Jean. After that, everything becomes official. You will not have to worry about anything, ever again." She left. The padlock clicked. I listened to her footsteps descend the stairs and counted each one. 14 steps. The front door opened and closed. A car engine started. Then silence. I stood up and walked to the window. The harbor was bright under the midday sun. I could see the marine supply store on Bay Street clearly, the rooftop antenna glinting like a needle against the sky. Captain Leon Marsh would be inside, sorting inventory, drinking black coffee from a thermos, listening to the Marine Weather Band on his old Grundig radio. I needed to send a signal. Not by phone. Megan's restricted device was useless. Not by voice. The walls were thin, and Brandon visited without warning. I needed something ancient, something no smartphone could intercept and no algorithm could trace. I found a piece of broken mirror in the corner of the attic. A shard the size of my palm left over from when we renovated the bathroom years ago. I held it up to the window and angled it toward the sun. The light caught the glass and threw a bright point across the water. A dot of white fire aimed directly at the rooftop antenna on Bay Street. 3 short flashes. 3 long. 3 short. Then the letters that would set everything in motion. DRAG. NET. NOW. I lowered the mirror and waited. Somewhere across the harbor, I prayed an old sailor was watching. The hearing was scheduled for 10 in the morning at the Beaufort County Courthouse on Rebo Road. Brandon arrived at the attic at 7:15, wearing a charcoal suit I had never seen before. The price tag was still attached to the inside of the left sleeve. He had not noticed it, or he did not care. He carried a garment bag and laid it on the mattress beside me. "I brought you something to wear," he said. "We want you to look presentable." Inside the bag was a pair of brown corduroy pants, 2 sizes too large, a plaid flannel shirt with a coffee stain on the collar, and a pair of scuffed loafers with no socks. The outfit was deliberate. It was the uniform of a man whose mind had already departed, a man who could not dress himself, a man who needed his son to choose his clothes and sign his papers and manage his life. I put on every piece without protest. I buttoned the flannel slowly, fumbling with the buttons as if my fingers had forgotten how they worked. Brandon watched me from the doorway with his arms crossed. He nodded once, satisfied with the costume he had selected for me. Megan waited in the car. A black Mercedes sedan that I knew for a fact was leased under Crawford Maritime Group's corporate account. She sat in the passenger seat applying lipstick in the visor mirror. She wore a navy dress and pearl earrings. She looked like a woman attending a charity luncheon, not a woman escorting her father-in-law to a proceeding designed to strip him of every legal right he possessed. Brandon drove. I sat in the back seat behind Megan and stared out the window. The streets of Beaufort passed by in a blur of palmetto trees and painted storefronts and morning joggers who had no idea that an old man in corduroy pants was riding past them toward the fight of his life. I counted the blocks. 7 blocks to the courthouse. 7 blocks to the moment that would determine whether I spent my remaining years locked in an attic or standing on the deck of a boat with the wind in my face. We arrived at 9:42. The courthouse was a brick building with white columns and an American flag hanging limp in the humid air. Brandon parked in the handicapped space near the entrance. He did not have a handicapped placard. He simply assumed that the man in the back seat justified the violation. Inside, the courtroom was smaller than I expected. 4 rows of wooden benches. A judge's bench made of dark mahogany. 2 tables facing the bench, one for the petitioner, one for the respondent. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead like trapped insects. The air smelled like floor polish and old paper. Brandon guided me to the respondent's table and pulled out the chair for me. I sat down and placed my hands flat on the surface. My fingers were steady. I made them shake. A small tremor in the right hand, then the left. Brandon noticed and turned to Megan with a look that said, "See? He is getting worse." Their attorney arrived at 9:51. His name was Gerald Fisk. He was a tall man with thin hair and a briefcase that clicked open with 2 brass latches. He shook Brandon's hand, nodded at Megan, and glanced at me the way a butcher glances at a carcass already hanging on the hook. He set 3 folders on the petitioner's table and arranged them in a neat row. I had no attorney at the table beside me. The chair to my left was empty. Brandon had made sure of that. The guardianship petition stated that the respondent had been offered legal counsel and declined due to cognitive inability to participate in his own defense. Megan had typed those words herself on a laptop in my own kitchen. Using a law license the state of South Carolina had revoked 14 months earlier. The judge entered at 10:03. The Honorable Margaret Chen. She was a small woman, with silver hair pulled into a tight knot and glasses that sat at the tip of her nose. She moved with the careful precision of someone who had spent 30 years weighing the difference between justice and the law. She sat down, opened a folder, and read silently for 2 minutes. Then, she looked up. "This is the matter of emergency guardianship petition filed by Brandon Michael Crawford on behalf of Eugene Arthur Crawford," she said. "Is the petitioner present?" Gerald Fisk stood. "Yes, Your Honor." Brandon Crawford is present along with his wife, Megan Crawford, who assisted in preparing the documentation. Judge Chen looked at the empty chair beside me. "And the respondent has no legal representation?" Fisk cleared his throat. "That is correct, Your Honor. Mr. Crawford was offered counsel, but was unable to engage meaningfully with the process due to his cognitive condition. His son is acting in his best interest." Judge Chen studied me over the rim of her glasses. I met her gaze for half a second, then let my eyes drift to the ceiling. I opened my mouth slightly and let it stay open. I heard Brandon exhale with relief behind me. "Proceed," Judge Chen said. Gerald Fisk opened the first folder. He presented the emergency guardianship petition, stamped and notarized, listing my diagnosis as advanced vascular dementia with rapid cognitive deterioration. He presented a letter from a Dr. Harold Stokes, a physician I had never met, attesting to my inability to manage my personal and financial affairs. He presented 3 sworn affidavits from neighbors who claimed to have witnessed me wandering the neighborhood in confusion on multiple occasions. Every document was a lie. Every signature was built on fraud. Every word was a brick in a wall designed to bury me alive. Fisk opened the second folder. He presented the real estate listing for my Beaufort home, priced at $280,000 cash, signed by Megan Crawford as my power of attorney. He presented bank records showing my accounts had been frozen for my protection. He presented the Palmetto Grove intake form documenting my admission to the memory care unit. Judge Chen reviewed each document carefully. She made notes in the margin of her folder. She asked Fisk 2 clarifying questions about the timeline of my diagnosis. He answered smoothly, without hesitation, the way a man answers when he has rehearsed his lies in front of a mirror. Then Judge Chen turned to me. "Mr. Crawford," she said gently, "do you understand why you are here today?" I looked at her. I let my eyes fill with confusion. I opened my mouth and said the words I had been saving for this exact moment. "I just want to find my boat," I said. "Can you help me find my boat?" Brandon lowered his head and pressed his hand over his eyes, performing grief. Megan reached for a tissue. Gerald Fisk closed his second folder and reached for the third. And somewhere outside that courtroom, a door opened that no one in that room expected. The door at the back of the courtroom swung open and hit the wall with a sound like a gunshot. Every head turned. Gerald Fisk froze with his hand on the third folder. Brandon straightened in his chair. Megan's tissue stopped halfway to her eye. Teddy Banks walked in wearing a 3-piece navy suit. A white shirt starched so stiff it could have stood up on its own, and a burgundy tie knotted with military precision. Under his left arm he carried a leather briefcase. Under his right arm he carried a manila folder so thick it bent at the spine. Behind him walked Captain Leon Marsh in a clean denim jacket, holding a cardboard box sealed with packing tape. Behind Leon walked Ruth, my Ruth. In the cream blouse and dark slacks she had purchased on the morning we fled Beaufort. Her back was straight. Her chin was level. Her eyes were locked on Megan, like a rifle scope finding its target. Judge Chen raised her hand. "Who are you, sir? And why are you interrupting these proceedings?" Teddy stopped at the bar and set his briefcase on the floor. "Your Honor, my name is Theodore James Banks. I am a licensed attorney and certified forensic accountant retained by Eugene Arthur Crawford as his legal counsel under a protected Jonah filing executed 4 days ago." He reached into the briefcase and produced a single sheet of paper. He handed it to the bailiff, who carried it to the judge. "I have standing to represent Mr. Crawford in this matter, and I respectfully request that these proceedings be paused until the court has reviewed the evidence I intend to present." Gerald Fisk stood up. "Your Honor, this is highly irregular. The respondent declined legal counsel. The record is clear on that point." Judge Chen read the Jonah filing for 30 seconds. Then she looked at Fisk over her glasses. "The record indicates that the respondent was deemed unable to engage with counsel by the petitioner, not by the court, and not by the respondent himself. This filing is valid." She turned to Teddy. "You may approach, Mr. Banks." Teddy unbuttoned his jacket and took his place at the table beside me. He did not look at me. He did not wink or nod or offer any signal. He simply opened his folder and began. "Your Honor, every document presented by the petitioner this morning is fraudulent. Every single one. And I can prove it in the next 15 minutes. The courtroom went silent. I could hear the fluorescent lights buzzing above us. I could hear Megan's breath catch in her throat like a fishbone. Teddy laid the first page on the table. Megan Lynn Crawford, formerly Megan Lynn Porter, had her license to practice law revoked by the South Carolina State Bar 14 months ago for falsifying real estate closing documents. She is currently not authorized to draft, notarize, or file any legal instrument in this state. Every document she prepared for this petition, including the guardianship filing, the power of attorney, and the real estate listing, is void as a matter of law. He slid a certified copy of the State Bar's revocation order across the table to the bailiff. Judge Chen read it. Her expression did not change, but her pen stopped moving. Teddy laid the second page down. The letter from Dr. Harold Stokes, attesting to Mr. Crawford's dementia, is fabricated. Dr. Stokes retired from practice in 2021 and currently resides in a nursing facility in Myrtle Beach. He has advanced Parkinson's disease and has not signed a medical document in over 3 years. The signature on this letter was forged. He produced a notarized statement from Dr. Stokes's daughter, confirming her father's condition and denying any knowledge of the letter. Judge Chen accepted it without comment. Teddy continued. The 3 neighbor affidavits submitted by the petitioner were signed by individuals who do not reside within 4 miles of Mr. Crawford's Beaufort property. One of them is Megan Crawford's cousin. Another is a former employee of Brandon Crawford, who was terminated from Port Royal Terminal for theft last year. The third could not be located and may not exist. Gerald Fisk opened his mouth. Teddy did not pause. Furthermore, Your Honor, the emergency bank freeze on Mr. Crawford's accounts was initiated by Brandon Crawford using a power of attorney document drafted by his wife, a disbarred attorney. That document is therefore void, and the freeze was executed under false pretenses. I have filed a formal complaint with the credit union and the State Attorney General's office. Teddy turned to Captain Leon Marsh. Leon stepped forward, opened the cardboard box, and placed a laptop computer on the table. Teddy pressed a key, and a video began playing on the screen, angled so Judge Chen could see it clearly. The video showed Megan's live stream from the attic. Every word she had spoken, every lie she had narrated. The portable toilet she called a private bathroom. The crackers she called his favorite snacks. The padlock she never showed. And then, the moment that made Judge Chen remove her glasses and set them on the bench, the moment Megan carried my father's nautical charts downstairs and returned smelling like smoke, winking at the camera. This video was broadcast publicly on social media by Megan Crawford 2 days ago, Teddy said. It documents the confinement of a 70-year-old man in an attic room with a padlock on the outside of the door, a portable toilet, and no access to communication. It also documents the deliberate destruction of irreplaceable personal property belonging to my client. Judge Chen watched the video to the end. The courtroom was so quiet, I could hear my own heartbeat drumming against the flannel shirt they had dressed me in. Teddy closed the laptop. Your Honor, I have one final piece of evidence. He reached into his briefcase and pulled out a bound document, 60 pages thick, with a blue cover. This is a complete forensic audit of Brandon Crawford's financial activities over the past 18 months. It details $150,000 in cargo revenue diverted from Port Royal Terminal, $200,000 lost in a fraudulent cryptocurrency scheme, and $80,000 in gambling debts owed to offshore accounts. It also details $90,000 in credit card debt accumulated by Megan Crawford across 11 accounts. The total exposure is approximately $470,000. This guardianship petition is not about protecting Eugene Crawford. It is about accessing his assets to cover nearly $500,000 in debt. He placed the audit on the table and stepped back. Judge Chen sat motionless for 11 seconds. I counted each one. Then she turned to Gerald Fisk and said, "Counselor, do you wish to respond?" Fisk looked at Brandon. Brandon looked at Megan. Megan stared at the table, as if the wood grain contained an escape route she had not yet found. No one spoke. Judge Chen picked up her pen. "This petition is denied," she said. "And it is denied with prejudice." Judge Chen was not finished. She held the pen above the page and looked directly at Brandon. "Mr. Crawford," she said, "I am referring this matter to the Beaufort County District Attorney for investigation of fraud, elder abuse, unlawful confinement, and forgery. I am also issuing a temporary restraining order prohibiting you and your wife from contacting, approaching, or communicating with Eugene Arthur Crawford until further notice. She signed the order in 3 quick strokes. Bailiff, please ensure the petitioner and his wife understand the terms before they leave this building. Gerald Fisk closed his briefcase with trembling hands. He did not look at Brandon or Megan. He walked to the door, pushed it open, and disappeared into the hallway without a word. He had been paid to deliver a victory, and instead he had witnessed the demolition of his clients on live judicial record. I never saw him again. Brandon sat in his chair as if the bones in his legs had dissolved. His charcoal suit, the one with the price tag still dangling from the left sleeve, looked suddenly too large for his body. His face was gray. His mouth opened and closed without producing sound. A fish pulled from water and placed on hot concrete. Megan moved first. She stood, grabbed her purse from the back of the chair, and walked toward the door with her chin raised, as though dignity could be manufactured by posture alone. She made it 4 steps before Ruth intercepted her. My wife had been sitting in the front row behind the bar, silent through the entire proceeding. She had not spoken a word since entering the courtroom. She had not moved. She had simply watched, her hands folded in her lap, her eyes cataloging every lie, every fabricated document, every performance Brandon and Megan had delivered. But when Megan tried to walk past her, Ruth stood up and blocked the aisle. Megan stopped. She looked at Ruth with an expression that attempted superiority, but achieved only fear. "Excuse me," she said. Ruth did not move. She studied Megan's face the way a woman studies a stain on white linen, calculating whether it can be removed or whether the fabric is ruined beyond repair. Then Ruth raised her right hand and slapped Megan across the left cheek with a sound that echoed off the courtroom walls like a crack of thunder over open water. Megan stumbled backward. Her pearl earring flew off and skittered across the hardwood floor, spinning in small circles before coming to rest against the leg of the petitioner's table. She pressed her hand to her face and stared at Ruth with wide, uncomprehending eyes. "That is for burning his father's maps," Ruth said. Her voice was steady and low, the voice of a woman who had waited days for this single moment and intended to deliver it with precision. "And this is for locking my husband in an attic like an animal." She leaned forward until her face was 6 inches from Megan's. "You filmed it. You laughed. You winked at a camera, while a 70-year-old man sat on a mattress on the floor with a padlock on his door. I watched every second of that video, Megan. Every second." The bailiff stepped forward and placed himself between them. Ruth straightened her blouse, nodded once at the bailiff, and returned to her seat. She folded her hands in her lap again, as if nothing had happened. I stood up from the respondent's table. The corduroy pants sagged at the waist. The flannel shirt hung off my shoulders like a flag on a windless day. I unbuttoned the shirt slowly, folded it, and placed it on the table. Beneath it I wore a plain white undershirt, clean and fitted. I rolled up the corduroy pants at the cuffs and tightened the belt. It was not much, but it was mine. The costume was over. I walked around the table and stood in front of Brandon. He was still sitting. He had not moved since the judge denied the petition. His eyes were wet. His hands gripped the edge of the table as if releasing it would cause him to fall through the floor. "Dad," he whispered, "I am sorry. I am so sorry. I did not want this. It was Megan's idea. All of it. The guardianship, the house, the facility. She said it was the only way to fix the debt. She said you would never notice. She said your mind was already going and that we were just accelerating the inevitable. I swear, Dad, I never wanted to hurt you. I listened to every word. I let each syllable land and settle, like ash falling from a burned chart. My son, 39 years old, the boy I taught to tie a bowline knot on the deck of Dorothy May when he was 7, the boy who caught his first red drum in Port Royal Sound and screamed with joy so loud the pelicans scattered. That boy was sitting in front of me blaming his wife for a crime he had participated in with both hands. I pulled a chair from the table and sat down across from him. I placed my hands on my knees. I looked at his face and searched for the child I had raised. The child who used to fall asleep on my chest while I read him stories about pirates and buried treasure. "Brandon," I said, "I know about the $150,000 you stole from Port Royal. I know about the $200,000 you lost in Nova Coin. I know about the $80,000 in gambling debts. I know about every dollar, every lie, and every document Megan filed with a license she no longer holds. Teddy Banks has been auditing your accounts for weeks. There is nothing left to hide." Brandon's face crumbled. The muscles around his mouth collapsed inward. His chest heaved. He tried to speak, but produced only a broken, guttural sound that was not a word in any language I recognized. I leaned forward. "You had everything," I said. "You had a job at my port. You had a house I helped you buy. You had a father who would have written a check for every debt you owed if you had simply walked into my kitchen and told me the truth. But you chose this. You chose to lock me in a room and sell my home and burn your grandfather's maps and parade my humiliation on the internet for strangers to watch." I stood up. I buttoned nothing. There was nothing left to button. "You are my son," I said, "and I will love you until they put me in the ground. But as of this moment, you are no longer part of Crawford Maritime Group. You are no longer employed at Port Royal Terminal, and you are no longer welcome in my house." I turned and walked toward Ruth. She took my hand. Together, we walked out of the courtroom and into the bright Carolina sun. Teddy Banks filed the paperwork before we reached the parking lot. By noon, a circuit court judge had signed an emergency order freezing every account, credit line, and corporate access tied to Brandon and Megan Crawford. By 1 in the afternoon, the Port Royal Terminal Security Office had received a fax revoking Brandon's employee credentials, building access, and parking privileges. By 2, the corporate leasing company that managed Crawford Maritime Group's vehicle fleet had dispatched a tow truck to recover the black Mercedes sedan. Megan had been driving on the company account. I did not witness any of this firsthand. Ruth and I were sitting in a booth at a seafood shack on Ladies Island, eating fried shrimp and hush puppies with tartar sauce and drinking sweet tea from mason jars. The television above the counter played a college baseball game. The waitress called me sweetheart and refilled my glass without being asked. I sat there, in my white undershirt and oversized corduroy pants, dipping shrimp into sauce, and felt like a man who had just walked out of a burning building and discovered that the air outside was the sweetest thing he had ever tasted. Teddy called at 3:15. He said, "The eviction team is ready. Do you want to be there?" I thought about it for 10 seconds. Then I said, "Yes." We drove to Brandon's apartment in a waterfront complex on Carteret Street. The building was 4 stories tall with iron balconies and a rooftop pool. Brandon and Megan had moved in 2 years earlier. The rent was $3,200 a month. I knew this because Crawford Maritime Group had been paying it through a subsidiary housing account that Brandon had authorized himself to use without my knowledge. Teddy's audit had uncovered the payments buried inside a line item labeled Port Operations Staff Housing. My son had classified himself as staff. When we arrived, a flatbed truck was already parked in the loading zone. 4 men stood beside it, wearing gray coveralls with a moving company logo on the back. They were stevedores from Port Royal Terminal, dock workers who had loaded and unloaded cargo from Crawford Maritime vessels for years. Teddy had called their foreman that morning and asked for volunteers. All 4 had raised their hands. They knew Gene Crawford. They knew what his son had done. Word travels fast on the waterfront, faster than the tide, and twice as unforgiving. Teddy handed the building manager a copy of the court order and the lease termination notice. The manager read it, nodded, and unlocked the apartment door with a master key. He stepped aside and let the stevedores enter. I stood in the hallway and watched. Ruth stood beside me, her hand resting on my forearm. Neither of us crossed the threshold. This was not our home. It had never been our home. It was a stage set constructed with stolen money and furnished with borrowed time. The apartment was larger than I expected. 2 bedrooms, An open kitchen with granite countertops. A living room with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the Beaufort River. The furniture was expensive and tasteless. A white leather sectional, a glass coffee table, a television the size of a dining room door. The refrigerator held champagne, imported cheese, and nothing that required actual cooking. The closet in the master bedroom contained 43 pairs of shoes. I know because one of the stevedores counted them aloud as he packed them into boxes, shaking his head after every number. The men worked efficiently. They had spent their careers moving heavy cargo under time pressure, and an apartment full of luxury furniture was nothing compared to a shipping container packed with industrial equipment. They wrapped the sectional in moving blankets, disassembled the bed frame, boxed the kitchen appliances, and stacked everything on the flatbed in under 90 minutes. The television came last. 2 men carried it sideways through the doorway, while a third held the elevator. It barely fit. While the stevedores worked, Teddy walked through the apartment with a clipboard, documenting every item for the court record. He opened drawers, checked cabinets, and photographed the contents of a home office where Megan had kept a laptop, a printer, and a filing cabinet full of documents. He sealed the filing cabinet with evidence tape and had 2 stevedores carry it to a separate vehicle. That cabinet, he told me, would be delivered directly to the district attorney's office. I stood at the living room window and looked out at the river. A shrimp boat moved slowly upstream, its nets raised like open arms. The captain stood at the wheel in a faded cap and rubber boots. He did not know that a 70-year-old man in corduroy pants was watching him from a luxury apartment that would be empty in 20 minutes. He did not know that the man watching him owned 3 ports and 47 vessels and had just reclaimed his life from the people who tried to steal it. He was just a fisherman doing his work. And the simplicity of that image made my chest ache with something I could not name. The last item removed from the apartment was a framed photograph hanging in the hallway near the front door. It showed Brandon and Megan on their wedding day, standing under an arch of white flowers, smiling at the camera with the confidence of people who believed the future owed them everything. Brandon wore a tuxedo. Megan wore a dress that cost more than my first boat. Behind them, barely visible in the background, stood Ruth and I, holding hands, looking at our son with the kind of pride that now felt like a wound that would never fully close. One of the stevedores reached for the frame. I stopped him. "Leave it," I said. He looked at me, confused. I said, "Put it on the kitchen counter, face down." He did. The glass made a soft sound against the granite. Then he walked out. I took one last look at the empty apartment. The walls were bare. The floors were scratched where the furniture had been dragged. The sunlight coming through the windows illuminated nothing but dust, floating in the air like tiny lost ships with no harbor. Ruth tugged my arm. "Come on, Jean," she said. "We are not finished yet." She was right. The apartment was empty, but the net had one more knot to tie. Brandon and Megan were still free, still breathing the same Carolina air, still walking the same streets. The court had denied the guardianship and frozen their assets, but the real trap had not yet been sprung. The harbor was waiting. Dorothy May was still missing. And somewhere in the Low Country, my son was about to discover that losing an apartment was the smallest price he would pay. Teddy Banks spread a nautical chart across the conference table in his Charleston office and placed a coffee mug on each corner to hold it flat. The chart showed the coastline from Beaufort to Hilton Head. Every inlet, every sandbar, every channel marker drawn in blue and black ink. It was not one of my father's charts. Those were gone. But it was close enough to make my throat tighten when I looked at it. He pointed to a spot on the map where the broad river opened into Port Royal Sound. "Right here," he said. "This is where they are keeping Dorothy May." I leaned forward. "How do you know?" Captain Leon Marsh tracked the registration number through the maritime database. "Your son sold the boat 6 weeks ago to a shell company called Tidewater Leisure Holdings. That company is registered in Megan's maiden name, Porter. They did not even try to hide it properly. The boat is currently docked at a private marina on the north side of Port Royal Sound, 2 miles from the terminal where Brandon used to work." I stared at the dot on the map. My father's boat. The vessel he built with hand tools in a garage in 1969, the vessel my mother named after herself, the vessel I had sailed for 50 years through hurricanes and calm seas and every kind of weather a life can produce, was sitting 2 miles from a port I owned, and I had not known it. Ruth sat in the corner of the office, her arms crossed. She said, "So we go get it." Teddy shook his head. "It is not that simple." The sale was technically legal at the time it was executed, because Brandon held a valid power of attorney when he signed the transfer documents. The fact that the power of attorney was drafted by a disbarred attorney makes it voidable, but not automatically void. We need a judge to formally rescind the sale, and that takes time. "I do not have time," I said. Teddy smiled. "That is why we are not going to court for the boat. We are going to let them bring the boat to us." He pulled a second document from his briefcase. It was a Port Authority inspection notice issued under Crawford Maritime Group's regulatory authority. As the majority shareholder of 3 southeastern ports, I had the legal right to request a safety inspection of any vessel operating within port jurisdiction. The inspection required the vessel to be brought to a designated dock for examination by a certified marine surveyor. Failure to comply within 72 hours constituted a federal maritime violation. Teddy had already filed the notice. Tidewater Leisure Holdings, Megan's shell company, was required to deliver Dorothy May to the Port Royal Terminal inspection dock by Friday at noon. "They have to bring the boat to your own port," Teddy said. "And when they do, we will be waiting with a federal marshal, a rescission order, and a pair of handcuffs." I looked at the chart again. The route from the private marina to Port Royal Terminal ran through a narrow channel between 2 barrier islands. There was only one way in and one way out. It was a bottleneck, a choke point, a net. Friday arrived under a sky so blue it looked painted. I stood on the inspection dock at Port Royal Terminal at 11:30 in the morning, wearing the navy blue linen suit I had purchased the week before. Ruth stood beside me in a white sundress and flat shoes. Teddy stood behind us with his briefcase. Captain Leon Marsh stood at the end of the dock with binoculars pressed to his eyes, scanning the channel. At 11:51, Leon lowered the binoculars. "Contact," he said. "Single vessel. Heading northwest through the channel. White hull. Blue trim. It is her. Jean. It is Dorothy May." I saw the boat before I heard it. She came around the point slowly, her engine coughing the way it always did at low speed. A sound I could identify in a thunderstorm from a quarter-mile away. The white hull was dirty. The blue trim was faded. The name on the stern was partially obscured by algae, but I could still read the letters my mother had chosen 57 years ago. Dorothy May. Beaufort, South Carolina. A man I did not recognize was at the helm. He was young, maybe 30, wearing sunglasses and a tank top. He guided the boat to the inspection dock and tossed a line to Leon, who cleated it without expression. The young man stepped onto the dock and looked around with the confused irritation of someone who had been forced to drive a boat across open water for a bureaucratic formality. Behind him, stepping off the stern onto the dock, was Megan Crawford. She froze when she saw me. Her face cycled through 5 expressions in 3 seconds. Surprise, confusion, recognition, calculation, and finally something that looked like the first stage of genuine fear. She was wearing jeans and a windbreaker. No pearl earrings. No navy dress. No lipstick. She looked like a woman who had been sleeping in her car. Teddy stepped forward. He handed the federal marshal a document. The marshal read it, nodded, and approached Megan. "Megan Lynn Crawford," he said. "You are under arrest for fraud, forgery, elder abuse, unlawful practice of law, and conspiracy to deprive a legal owner of property. You have the right to remain silent." Megan did not remain silent. She screamed. She screamed at Brandon, who was not there. She screamed at Teddy. She screamed at the marshal. She screamed at me. She screamed words that bounced off the water and scattered the pelicans from the pilings and echoed across the terminal like the cry of something wounded and cornered. And finally, irreversibly caught. The marshal placed handcuffs on her wrists. The metal clicked twice. She was led up the dock toward a waiting vehicle. Her windbreaker flapped in the harbor breeze. I stepped onto Dorothy May. The deck was warped and stained. The cabin smelled like mildew and neglect. The wheel was sticky with salt residue, but when I placed my hands on it, I felt the grain of the wood my father had shaped. The same wheel he had turned 10,000 times. The same wheel that had guided us through storms I thought would kill us. Ruth stepped aboard behind me. She placed her hand on my back. I leaned into the wheel and closed my eyes. "She is home," Ruth said. I nodded. "So am I." I spent the first week sanding the deck by hand. I started at the bow and worked my way aft, one plank at a time, using 80 grit paper wrapped around a cork block the way my father taught me when I was 12 years old. The wood beneath the grime was still solid. Heart pine, cut from trees that had been growing before the Civil War, milled in a sawmill outside Beaufort that no longer existed. My father had chosen every board himself, running his fingers along the grain the way a blind man reads scripture. He said you could tell the character of wood by its texture. That honest wood felt warm even on a cold day. The planks on Dorothy May felt warm under my palms. And I took that as a sign that the boat forgave me for letting her go. Ruth brought me lunch every day at noon. She walked down the dock carrying a cooler bag and a thermos, set them on the transom, and sat in the captain's chair while I ate. We did not talk much during those meals. We did not need to. 47 years of marriage had taught us that silence between two people who trust each other is not empty. It is full of everything that does not require words. The engine took longer to fix. The previous owner, whoever the young man in the tank top had been, had run the diesel without changing the oil for what appeared to be several months. The cylinders were scored. The fuel injectors were clogged with carbon deposits so thick they looked like black coral. I pulled the injectors myself, soaked them in solvent overnight, and reinstalled them the next morning. Leon Marsh brought a replacement oil filter from the marine supply store and stood beside me while I drained the old oil into a bucket. It came out black and thick, like molasses left in the sun. Leon shook his head and said, "They treated her like a rental car." I said, "They treated her like they treated me." Leon did not respond to that. He just handed me a wrench and held the bucket steady. The hull needed 3 coats of paint. I chose the original colors: white below the waterline, blue above, with the name repainted on the stern in the same block letters my mother had selected in 1969. I found a photograph of the original lettering in a box of old pictures Ruth had kept in a closet at the Beaufort house. The photograph was faded and creased, but the letters were legible. Dorothy May. I traced them onto the hull with a pencil, then filled them in with marine enamel using a small brush. Each letter took 20 minutes. I did not rush. My mother's name deserved patience. While I restored the boat, Teddy managed the legal war. Megan's trial began 3 weeks after her arrest at the Port Royal dock. The prosecution presented 112 exhibits, including the forged guardianship petition, the fraudulent power of attorney, the faked medical letter from Dr. Stokes, the live stream video from the attic, the financial audit documenting the stolen cargo revenue, and the Tidewater Leisure Holdings registration, linking Megan to the illegal sale of Dorothy May. The defense attorney, a public defender named Sarah Colton, who looked exhausted before the trial even started, argued that Megan had acted under financial duress and emotional pressure from her husband. The jury deliberated for 4 hours. They found Megan Crawford guilty on 11 counts, including fraud, forgery, elder abuse, unlawful confinement, practicing law without a license, and conspiracy. Judge Margaret Chen, who had presided over the original guardianship hearing, was assigned the sentencing. She reviewed the case for 2 days. Then she called the courtroom to order and delivered her judgment. 20 years, she said. The defendant demonstrated a calculated and sustained pattern of abuse directed at a vulnerable elder for personal financial gain. The court finds no mitigating circumstances sufficient to reduce this sentence. Megan stood motionless as the sentence was read. She did not scream this time. She did not cry. She stared at the wall behind the judge's bench as if she were reading something written there that no one else could see. The marshals led her out through the side door. The door closed behind her with a sound like a period at the end of a very long sentence. Brandon was not in the courtroom. He had accepted a plea deal 2 weeks earlier, cooperating with the district attorney in exchange for reduced charges, 3 years of supervised probation, full restitution of the stolen cargo revenue, surrender of all claims to Crawford Maritime Group assets, and 200 hours of community service. Teddy told me the deal was lenient. I told Teddy that Brandon was still my son, and that leniency for a son is not the same as leniency for a stranger. I did not see Brandon sign the plea agreement. I did not want to. Ruth told me he looked thin when she saw him outside the district attorney's office. She said his suit did not fit anymore, and his shoes were scuffed, and he was carrying a plastic bag instead of a briefcase. She said he looked like a man who had fallen from a great height and was still trying to understand which bones were broken. On the day I finished restoring Dorothy May, Ruth and I drove south to Edisto Island. Teddy had found a cottage there, a small blue house on stilts overlooking the marsh, with a private dock long enough for Dorothy May and a screened porch where the breeze carried the smell of salt grass and pluff mud. The house had 3 bedrooms. We used one. The second became Ruth's sewing room. The third I kept empty, with a clean bed and fresh linens, because Mrs. Opal Jenkins had agreed to visit whenever she liked, and I wanted her to have a room that felt like it belonged to her. Opal arrived the following Saturday, carrying a cast-iron pot and a bag of andouille sausage. She walked into the kitchen, looked around once, nodded with approval, and began making gumbo. She did not ask permission. She did not need to. Some debts are not repaid with money. They are repaid with a door that is always open and a bowl that is always full. I sat on the porch and watched the sun drop behind the marsh grass. Dorothy May rocked gently at the dock, her fresh paint glowing in the amber light. The water was still. The birds were quiet. And for the first time in weeks, I did not think about courtrooms or handcuffs or burning maps or padlocked doors. Teddy Banks arrived at the Edisto Island cottage on a Tuesday morning in October, carrying a leather portfolio and 2 cups of coffee from the gas station on Highway 17. He set the coffee on the porch railing and opened the portfolio on the table between us. Inside was a document 40 pages long with a blue cover and gold lettering that read, Crawford Maritime Group Elder Shield Foundation Charter. I asked him to explain it in plain language. He leaned back in his chair and said, "You are worth approximately $80 million, Gene. You have 47 vessels, 3 ports, and a network of subsidiaries that generate revenue every single day. You do not need more money. You need a legacy." He had spent 6 weeks designing the foundation. The Elder Shield Fund would receive an initial endowment of $5 million from Crawford Maritime Group's operating reserves. The fund would provide legal representation, emergency housing, and financial counseling to elderly victims of guardian abuse, estate fraud, and family exploitation across the southeastern United States. Every case would be reviewed by a board of 3 attorneys, a forensic accountant, and a licensed social worker. No victim would be charged a fee. Not $1. Not ever. I read the charter from the first page to the last. The language was dense, but the intention was clear. This fund would catch the people who fell through the cracks in the system, the old men and old women whose children turned on them, whose savings were stolen by the people they trusted most, whose voices were silenced by forged documents and fraudulent diagnoses, people like me. Except without an $80 million empire hidden behind a fisherman's overalls. I signed the charter at the bottom of page 40. Ruth signed as co-trustee. Teddy signed as executive director. Captain Leon Marsh, who had driven down from Charleston that morning, signed as vice president of operations. He would oversee the fund's outreach program along the Carolina coast, visiting fishing communities, church groups, and senior centers to educate elderly residents about the warning signs of guardian fraud. When the signatures were dry, Teddy shook my hand and said, "You just built something that will outlast every ship in your fleet." I told him that was the point. The following Saturday, I began teaching children to fish. It was not planned. A woman from the Edisto Island Community Center had heard that an old fisherman had moved into the Blue Cottage on the marsh, and she asked if I would be willing to spend an hour with a group of kids who had never held a rod. I said yes before she finished the sentence. 8 children arrived at the dock at 9 in the morning. They ranged in age from 7 to 13. They wore sneakers and baseball caps and carried the nervous energy of young people confronting deep water for the first time. I handed each of them a rod, a simple spinning reel with a 12-pound test line and a number 4 hook. I showed them how to thread a shrimp onto the hook, how to cast with a smooth overhead motion, how to feel the difference between a nibble and a strike, and how to set the hook with a firm upward snap of the wrist. A boy named Darius, 9 years old with glasses too large for his face, caught the first fish. It was a spot-tail bass, maybe 2 pounds, silver and gold, with a black dot near the tail. He screamed when the rod bent and nearly dropped it into the water. I put my hand over his and helped him reel it in. When the fish broke the surface and thrashed in the sunlight, Darius looked at me with an expression I had not seen directed at me in a very long time. It was pure, uncomplicated trust, the kind of trust a child gives to an adult who shows them something true. I taught the class every Saturday for the rest of the fall. The group grew from 8 to 14 to 22. Ruth made sandwiches. Opal brought sweet tea in a 5-gallon cooler. Leon donated rods and tackle from the marine supply store. The community center printed flyers with a photograph of Darius holding his spot-tail bass, grinning so wide his glasses sat crooked on his nose. The caption read, "Fishing with Mr. Jean, Saturdays at 9. One evening in November, Ruth and I sat on the porch after dinner. The marsh was dark. The stars were sharp and close, the way they only appear in places where the nearest streetlight is a mile away. Dorothy May creaked softly at the dock, her lines taut against the tide. Somewhere in the distance, a shrimp boat's engine hummed across the water, a low and steady heartbeat that reminded me of every night I had spent on the ocean, every storm I had survived, every dawn I had welcomed, with salt on my lips and a wheel beneath my hands. Ruth said, "Do you think about him?" I knew she meant Brandon. I said, "Every day." She was quiet for a while. Then she said, "Do you think he will come back?" I looked at the empty chair on the other side of the porch. I had placed it there the day we moved in. I had not told Ruth why. I had not told anyone. But the chair was there. And it was not for Opal. And it was not for Leon. And it was not for Teddy. It was for a man who might never sit in it. A man who owed the state of South Carolina 3 years of supervised probation and 200 hours of community service and a debt to his father that no court could calculate. "I do not know," I said. "But the chair is here if he does." Ruth reached across the table and took my hand. We sat like that for a long time, 2 old people holding hands on a porch above the water, listening to the tide come in. I thought about my father, who built a boat in a garage and named it after the woman he loved. I thought about my mother, who never saw the empire that boat created but whose name still floated on the stern in block letters I had painted with my own hands. I thought about Darius and his crooked glasses and the spot-tail bass that taught him something no classroom ever could. And I thought about the horizon, that thin line where the water meets the sky, always visible and never reachable, the place where fishermen learn that the journey matters more than the catch. I had spent 70 years chasing that line. I had built a fleet, lost a son, survived a trap, and reclaimed my name. And now, sitting on this porch with Ruth's hand in mine, and Dorothy May rocking at the dock, and a chair waiting for a boy who might one day come home, I understood something my father had tried to tell me a long time ago. The net does not define the fisherman. The sea does. and the sea is still wide, and the morning is coming, and there is work left to do.